The room went dead silent. Marcus could barely breathe as the demo played in front of him. HelixCore, the system that had nearly destroyed everything he'd built, was fixed. But there was a twist. The voice that had just solved it was younger than anyone in the room could have imagined. It wasn't one of his engineers. It was a voice Marcus had never heard before, the voice of someone who wasn't supposed to exist. Someone who had no place here, his son, and Marcus he didn't even know he had one. Marcus, the CEO of LuxTek, is no stranger to pressure. He's built an empire from nothing, wielded power, and fought battles in boardrooms that would make most executives tremble. Yet, nothing could have prepared him for this. Nothing could have prepared him for the realization that the person who had just saved his company, the one person capable of solving $1 billion catastrophe, was a stranger to him, someone he never knew existed. For years, he'd been focused on his empire, determined to protect it at all costs. But in that moment, the weight of his past choices, his unrelenting ambition, and the family he abandoned hit him harder than any crisis ever could. How did this happen? The question echoed in Marcus's mind, louder than the hum of the conference room air conditioning. Why was Jones the one to fix it? Why had he stayed hidden for so long? And most importantly, who was he really to Marcus? What began as a moment of redemption would quickly unravel into a journey that would force Marcus to confront the choices he made years ago, choices that brought him to the peak of success, but left a broken legacy in their wake. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. I've missed you. Thank you for standing with me through the technical issues. We're finally steady again, and your support is the reason this channel keeps going. Before we begin, I want to speak a quick blessing over everyone watching. To the women, may God strengthen your spirit and calm every storm in your heart. To the men, may God guide your steps and multiply your efforts, and may His protection stay over every one of you. Amen. I'm also celebrating my very first subscribers. Thank you. Your support means more than you know. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Your subscription, your likes, and your shares to friends and family keep this channel alive and growing. It truly makes a difference. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, so I know you're here with me. Now let's get into today's story. The answer to those questions lies in a decision Marcus made long before he became the powerful CEO of LuxTek. A decision made in the heat of ambition, when love took a back seat to career, and when the future of his family was sacrificed on the altar of corporate success. To understand how this all came to be, we need to go back to a time when Marcus's heart was still open, and his mind hadn't yet been consumed by the weight of his empire. Back to when Zoe Jones's mother was the only woman he truly loved. Marcus Tile had always known the grind. He'd known what it meant to scrape by, to fight tooth and nail for every contract, every deal, every inch of success. Born to working-class parents in a small, tight-knit neighborhood in Washington, D.C., Marcus was no stranger to struggle. From the moment he could hold a book, his mind had been consumed by the promise of something greater. The streets around him whispered of limits, but his dreams, those were limitless. His journey into the world of tech was an accident of sorts, more like a collision between circumstance and raw ambition. After a few years at a second-tier university, where he struggled to pay tuition and learned how to balance textbooks with part-time jobs, Marcus managed to land a job at a small, innovative startup. He didn't have the pedigree of the Silicon Valley elite, no Ivy League degree or family connections, but he had something more, an unyielding drive and an innate talent for problem-solving. Within 3 years, he was promoted from junior coder to head of development. And then came the idea. LuxTek wasn't a name that people knew back then. It was just a small tech consultancy with big ideas. But Marcus had something else vision. He could see the future of the tech industry before it even began to form. He wasn't just thinking about the next big software release. He was thinking about the backbone of the digital world, about infrastructure that would redefine industries. His ideas about artificial intelligence and cloud computing were nothing short of revolutionary. But to make those ideas reality, he needed resources. And more than that, he needed influence. His hunger for success drove him to move faster, think harder, and take risks that others would shy away from. He pushed TileTech into a direction no one had dared take, pouring everything he had into building a tech empire that could rival the giants of the industry. By the time he was 30, TileTech was no longer just a consultancy, it was a force. But it wasn't just the company that was rising, Marcus was too. The first time Marcus met Zoe Kendra, he was sitting at a conference table at the annual Washington Tech Summit, a room full of investors, engineers, and corporate executives who were all jockeying for position in the industry's ever-expanding game. He was 29 years old, dressed in a suit that cost more than he'd ever spent on anything for himself, and there was an air of youthful arrogance about him. He was still new to the scene, eager to make his mark, to prove that he wasn't just another businessman on the rise. Zoe was there as a speaker, invited to present on a project she had been working on for her graduate thesis at MIT. She wasn't just any ordinary tech prodigy. Zoe was the type of woman who could talk about the inner workings of neural networks as though they were poetry. Brilliant. Relentless. She had a way of making everything sound so effortless, even when her ideas were light years ahead of anyone else in the room. Their first conversation wasn't about business. It wasn't about algorithms or machine learning or anything to do with the tech world. It was about life. She asked him about his upbringing, about the way he'd been shaped by his humble beginnings, and something in the way she asked made him feel seen. He told her stories of his childhood, of his parents' struggles, and his dreams of building something bigger than himself. Zoe listened, genuinely interested. She didn't see Marcus as just another corporate mogul, another tech shark circling for an opportunity. For the first time in years, Marcus felt understood, like someone could see the person he was behind the polished exterior of the CEO. And then, without even realizing it, their connection turned into something more than just words. Their relationship was like fire, intense, quick, and all-consuming. They spent nights working together on projects, discussing innovations, and challenging each other's ideas. But there was a catch. While Marcus's passion for the work was growing, so was his obsession with the company he was building. What had started as an innocent relationship between two tech enthusiasts soon began to buckle under the weight of Marcus's ambition. Zoe wanted to build with him. She wanted to create, to collaborate. But Marcus, he was more focused on creating something monumental, something that would last long after he was gone. She was already brilliant on her own, and together they could have been unstoppable. But Marcus had his sights set elsewhere. His vision, his company, and his future all were waiting for him to make his next move. And so, as the months went on, the time they spent together became less and less. Zoe was patient at first, understanding that the demands of a startup were all-consuming. She watched as Marcus slowly pulled away, his world narrowing down to meetings, decisions, and strategic planning. She understood the nature of ambition. She had it too. But ambition wasn't something that could be shared in equal measure when only one side of the relationship was carrying the weight. The cracks in their relationship appeared slowly at first, like small fissures in a foundation that would eventually crumble. Zoe wanted stability, a sense of partnership. She wanted someone who would be as invested in their future as she was in hers. But Marcus, he was already thinking 10 steps ahead. TileTech's growth was paramount. His dream was calling him louder and louder. Zoe knew the moment it happened, the moment Marcus stopped looking at her like she was the center of his world. They'd been at a dinner meeting, discussing business strategies, when he'd mentioned something about an upcoming merger with a major competitor. She tried to contribute to the conversation, but it felt like she was just a footnote, and in that moment she realized his heart wasn't with her anymore. It was with TileTech. The breakup was inevitable, though painful. Zoe chose to leave, to step away from a relationship that had become suffocating, both for her and for Marcus. But she wasn't leaving just him. She was leaving the dream they had shared, leaving behind the vision that they had once built together. And, though he hadn't realized it yet, Marcus was losing more than just her. He was losing a future. Zoe moved to a quieter part of Washington, D.C., far from the chaos of the tech world that had pulled Marcus into its orbit. She took the only thing that mattered with her, her son. She never told Marcus about the pregnancy. He had enough on his plate, she reasoned. And besides, the life he was building wouldn't have room for a child. What neither of them knew, at the time, was that the most important thing they had built, the most important thing Marcus had ever created, was growing inside her. Zoe had never wanted to keep Marcus from his son, but when she left him, when she walked away from the life they had almost built together, she knew that Marcus's world wasn't one that could easily accommodate the chaos of family. She was going to raise Jones alone, not just because she had to, but because, deep down, she believed it was for the best. She settled in a small, quiet neighborhood in Washington, D.C., far removed from the high-stakes world Marcus inhabited. Her life was simple, focused on nurturing her son's intellect without the distractions that came with the corporate world. There were no press conferences, no million-dollar deals, no fast cars or expensive suits. Instead, there were books, quiet afternoons at local parks, and nights spent by the glow of a computer screen. Zoe would sometimes look at the young boy she was raising and wonder, what kind of man would he become? She never told him who his father was. Zoe made a promise to herself when she walked away from Marcus that she wouldn't let him drag their son into the whirlwind of business and ambition. So, she built a life for Jones filled with love and focus, steering him away from the shadow of the man she once loved, the man who was now a stranger. Jones, for his part, never asked about Marcus. He grew up in a world where Zoe's love and guidance were the only constants, but there was something else in him. Something Zoe couldn't ignore, a mind that was too sharp, too curious for his age. By the time he was 7, he was already picking apart old computers and reassembling them faster than Zoe could keep track. He solved puzzles like breathing, and his questions about everything from coding to quantum mechanics often left Zoe astounded and a little nervous. He was a prodigy, but a quiet one, tucked away in a world that few could understand. While other kids his age were playing sports or hanging out at birthday parties, Jones spent his afternoons tinkering with code. He hacked into simple systems just to see how they worked, never with any malicious intent, always with a hunger for knowledge. By 12, he'd already written his first functional program, a simple app that helped his mother organize her emails. But it wasn't just about the code. It was about understanding the world, the same obsession Marcus had once had. One rainy afternoon, when Jones was 15, he found himself sifting through an old box of belongings in the attic. Among the items, he came across a stack of photographs, some from Zoe's past, some from the life she had lived before he was born. He flipped through the pictures slowly, his fingers lingering on a black and white photo of a man standing beside Zoe at a tech conference. He looked familiar, too familiar, but Jones couldn't place him. He stared harder, studying the man's face, the sharp jawline, the eyes that seemed to mirror his own. As he examined the photo, it dawned on him this was his father, Marcus Tile. It was a discovery that shook him, more than he cared to admit. The pieces clicked into place. The resemblance, the stories Zoe had told him about her past, a quiet bitterness whenever the tech world came up. It all made sense now. Jones didn't confront Zoe about it, not out of fear, but out of respect for the life she had built for them. Instead, he buried the knowledge deep inside, allowing it to simmer beneath the surface. He was content, at least for the time being, to stay hidden in the shadows of the world his mother had built for him. But the revelation was undeniable. He now knew who Marcus was, and as the years passed, a part of him began to wonder how different his life might have been had Marcus ever been there to guide him. HelixCore was supposed to be the future, the brainchild of years of work and millions of dollars in investment. It was more than just a software solution, it was a revolution. It was the engine that powered everything from hospital data systems to global financial markets, from airline routing to energy management. If there was one thing Marcus Tile was certain about, it was that HelixCore was going to change the world. For weeks after its launch, the world seemed to confirm his vision. Investors were praising its elegance, critics hailed it as a technological marvel, and the stock price soared to unprecedented heights. TileTech was not just on the map, it was the map, but in the background, a whisper began. At first, it was just a minor glitch, a slight slowdown in memory allocation, barely noticeable, but enough to raise an eyebrow in the engineering department. No one thought much of it. These things happened. A simple fix would be enough. Or so they thought. Then, the glitches spread. The slowdowns began to compound, ripple through systems, and soon, what was once a minor anomaly was morphing into something much darker. The first full system failure came just 3 weeks after HelixCore was deployed at a major hospital network in New York. Patient records were corrupted. Surgeons couldn't access real-time data during surgeries. The hospital had to shut down its network, diverting critical cases elsewhere. But that was just the beginning. The issues spiraled quickly from one isolated incident into a full-scale crisis. Financial systems worldwide began to stutter, sending shockwaves through the global stock market. Data from airlines became corrupted, causing chaos at airports as flight schedules went missing. The public was left in the dark, and the media was relentless. Inside TileTech's headquarters, the once optimistic buzz turned to panic. The engineering team worked day and night, their exhausted faces illuminated by the glow of computer screens as they scrambled to pinpoint the root of the problem. The bug, whatever it was buried too deep within the system. Every solution they tried only seemed to make things worse. Marcus watched it unfold in disbelief. This was supposed to be his legacy, the product that would cement TileTech as a global leader. But now, it was unraveling before his eyes, taking everything he had worked for down with it. The board called an emergency meeting. The pressure was mounting, and investors were starting to panic. Stocks began to plummet, and even the most loyal clients were growing concerned. They wanted answers. They wanted Marcus to fix it. But Marcus was powerless. His engineers couldn't crack it. His top advisors were at a loss. The company he had built from the ground up, the empire that had once felt unbreakable, was now teetering on the edge of collapse. Every call he received, every email he opened, only made the pressure heavier. Marcus, we need answers. We're losing confidence in the leadership. This could be the end of TileTech. He had built this empire with his own hands, and now it was all slipping through his fingers, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. In the darkest corners of his mind, Marcus knew that HelixCore was more than just a software failure. It was a reflection of everything that had gone wrong in his life, the relationships he had sacrificed, the choices he had made, and the cracks that had slowly begun to form in his perfect world. The collapse was inevitable, and Marcus didn't know who or what could save him now. The walls of Marcus's office felt like they were closing in on him. Every passing hour, another piece of the empire he had spent years building seemed to crumble. The headlines were ruthless, the board increasingly impatient, and the tech teams were no closer to finding a solution. HelixCore, the very backbone of his company, had become a ticking time bomb, and Marcus, for all his power, was powerless. It was in one of these moments of crushing defeat that he saw the message. An encrypted email, subject line short, asterisk, HelixCore, fix. He stared at it for a long time. His hands shook as he clicked open the message, wondering if it was another well-meaning attempt from a third-party consultant or a team of anonymous hackers trying to exploit the chaos. But no, it wasn't a typical message. The contents were simple, just a link to a file and a brief line beneath it. I can fix it. With a flicker of curiosity and perhaps desperation, he clicked the link. The video began to load. A voice spoke. The tone was calm, almost unnervingly so. Youthful, yet confident. This is the solution to HelixCore's issue, the voice said matter-of-factly. Here's how we can solve the memory allocation bug and rework the system architecture without causing further cascading failures. Marcus froze. The voice, it was so familiar, yet impossible. There was no mistaking it. It wasn't the usual voice of one of his seasoned engineers or outside consultants. It was a voice he had never heard, but somehow it felt like it belonged to someone he should have known. The screen flickered as a series of code snippets began to flash before him. The young voice explained the fix with an ease that made Marcus's mind race. Lines of code flowed seamlessly across the screen. There were no errors, no hesitations, just a fluid, surgical precision as the system was restructured and recalibrated. For a moment, Marcus thought he was dreaming. His son, the one he never knew existed, had just solved the problem that no one else could. The voice was calm, confident, as though the solution had always been so simple. The demo ended, leaving Marcus sitting in stunned silence. There was no mistake. He recognized the logic, the structure of the fix. And now he recognized something else, something deeper, though he hadn't wanted to admit it. This young man, the one who had just saved his empire, was his son, Jones Marcus. The name was a revelation that sent a cold shiver down Marcus's spine. He watched the video again, his heart pounding, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. A deep, raw, overwhelming guilt. How had he never known? How had he allowed this brilliant young man to slip through the cracks of his life? The emotions crashed over him, pride, awe, but also guilt. A guilt so sharp that it felt like a physical weight pressing down on his chest. He should have been there for him. He should have known, should have recognized the brilliance in his own blood long ago. Instead, he had let ambition blind him. Marcus slumped into his chair, hands covering his face as the gravity of the situation sank in. The company, his legacy, saved by a son he didn't know. And now, that son's brilliance was all he had left. The empire he had spent his life building had been saved, but the cost had been more than just technical. It had cost him the one thing that truly mattered, family. He had lost Jones once. But now, somehow, in the most unexpected of ways, Jones had come back to save him. Marcus sat motionless in his office long after the demo had ended. The image of the screen still burned into his mind. His thoughts were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Jones's brilliance had saved him, had saved TileTech, but in doing so, it had revealed the deep fissures in his own life, the parts of it he had spent years trying to ignore. How had he failed so completely to see the truth? How had he missed the fact that his son had been right under his nose, a ghost in the shadows of his empire? His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he stared at the file again. The demo had been a revelation, but the deeper question remained. Who was Jones Marcus? Marcus's mind wandered back to the time before everything had fallen apart. Back to when Zoe had first walked out of his life, her departure as quiet as it had been devastating. The memory was still sharp, like a fresh wound that never quite healed. He remembered the night they'd broken up, the cold silence that stretched between them as Zoe handed him the paperwork. The weight of the decision hung heavy in the air, but Marcus had barely noticed. The pressure from his investors had become overwhelming, his focus laser-sharp on building TileTech into something invincible. Zoe, standing there in their cramped apartment, had spoken softly, almost as if she were pleading. "You're choosing them over us," she had said. "You're choosing your company over me, over times us, asterisk." The words had cut deeper than Marcus cared to admit, but the truth was, he didn't know how to balance both. His dream, his vision for the future, had felt like the only thing that mattered, and in that moment, it was easier to walk away from Zoe than it was to turn his back on everything he'd fought for. Zoe's perspective, as it unfolded in Marcus's mind, was a painful revelation. He saw her now, not just as a woman he had loved, but as a mother who had carried their child alone. A mother who had, for years, quietly borne the weight of a decision he had made. A decision that had sent her to the fringes of his world, where she had to raise their son without him. It wasn't just the absence of Marcus that had hurt Zoe, it was the world she had chosen to protect Jones from. She had never once spoken ill of Marcus, but her silence had been loud enough to tell its own story. She had made a life for Jones far from the corporate frenzy Marcus had thrived in, and in doing so, she had created a bubble of safety, a space where her son could grow without the toxicity of ambition that had consumed his father. Zoe had always believed in the purity of Jones's potential, but she also feared the price of it. She knew that if Marcus had known about Jones, if he had been involved, his world would have tried to swallow him whole, the same way it had swallowed her, the same way it had consumed Marcus, leaving her alone to fend for herself. The choice Zoe had made to keep Jones away from Marcus had never been about anger or resentment. It was about protection. Protection from the very world that Marcus had built, a world of ruthless ambition, of boardrooms and endless deals, where everything, even love, had to take a back seat to success. As Marcus sat there, staring at the demo one more time, a sick realization washed over him. The world he had fought to create, the empire he had spent his life building, had cost him more than he had ever realized. It had cost him his family. It had cost him Jones. And now, as Jones's voice echoed in his ears, the question he could no longer ignore was simple, yet brutal. Asterisk. Could he ever make it right? The boardroom was a tense silence, punctuated only by the quiet hum of air conditioning and the occasional click of a mouse as the demo from Jones played on the screen. Marcus sat at the head of the table, his eyes locked on the monitor, but his mind was elsewhere. The faces of the board members around him, expressions ranging from anxiety to skepticism, reflected the collective weight of the moment. TileTech's future hung in the balance, and the young voice on the other side of the screen was the only thing standing between them and collapse. The demo continued to run, a flawless stream of code and solutions that seemed almost too perfect. Jones's calm, methodical voice narrated every step with such clarity that it was hard to imagine someone of his age could possess such brilliance. Marcus felt a sinking feeling in his stomach as the fix was revealed, layer by layer, with surgical precision. The technical language was foreign to him in parts, but the outcome was unmistakable. The HelixCore disaster, the catastrophe that had threatened everything, was being solved before his eyes. And then it hit him, his son, the prodigy he had never known, the one person who had saved him, the one person he had never been there for. He had thought himself a genius, the master of his domain, the man who had built an empire from nothing. But now, watching Jones's demo, Marcus realized how much he had missed, how much he had lost. His career, his achievements, had been built on the assumption that his intellect and ambition were enough to overcome everything. But Jones times had solved a problem that no one else could. Not with brute force or ambition, but with something far more profound, brilliance that Marcus had never even known existed in his own blood. The boardroom was still, but Marcus could feel the weight of 1,000 questions pressing on him. How had he missed this? How had he not known? The pain of the realization was almost physical. His thoughts were shattered by a voice from the table, one of the senior board members, a man named Greg Davis, who had been silent throughout the demo. "This," Greg said slowly, his voice heavy with disbelief. "This is the fix we've been searching for. This is the solution to everything." The room fell into a murmur of agreement. Eyes shifted from the screen to Marcus, their gazes lingering a bit longer than usual. The board, once skeptical, now saw Jones as the future of TileTech, the one person who could lead them out of the crisis. Marcus felt his throat tighten. He had always been the one in control, the one making the tough decisions, the one steering the ship. But now, in that moment, he felt like an outsider in his own company. The very people who had once relied on his vision were now looking to his son for answers. "We need to consider the future of this company," Greg continued, breaking through Marcus's spiraling thoughts. "And frankly, I believe the future of TileTech might rest in Jones's hands." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. His own son, the one he had never known, the one he had abandoned to chase a dream, was now the company's greatest asset. The very same son he had pushed away for years was now the one who could save everything he had worked for. The harsh truth cut deeper than Marcus could have ever imagined. His empire, his legacy, everything he had built, was now tied to the son he had never been there for. The room seemed to spin as Marcus fought to keep his composure. "Marcus," Greg's voice snapped him back to the moment. "What do you think?" Marcus looked around the room, every eye on him now. His mind was a storm of guilt and realization, but he knew what had to be said. "I think," he began, his voice steady but strained, "I think the future of TileTech is in good hands, and I think it's time I step back and let my son lead." A wave of silence followed his words. The board members exchanged glances, unsure of how to react to the admission. But in that silence, Marcus knew that this was the truth he could no longer deny. His son Jones was the future. And Marcus? He had finally seen the price of ambition. The moment the demo ended, the weight of Marcus's decision settled on him. He knew he couldn't ignore this any longer. His empire had been saved by the son he had never known, a child he had abandoned to pursue a dream that had cost him more than he'd ever realized. The time had come to confront the past, to face the person he had been running from for so long. Marcus knew what he had to do. He picked up the phone and dialed the number that had been burned into his memory since the demo ended. It was a number he had never called, had never even known existed. When the line connected, he almost hesitated, the words catching in his throat. "Jones," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I need to talk to you." There was a long pause on the other end. Marcus could almost hear the quiet wariness in Jones's voice when he spoke. "What is it?" Jones asked, his tone guarded. Marcus felt the weight of his own guilt in the silence that followed. He had never been a man of words, always thinking actions would speak louder. But now, he understood that words were all that were left. He had to make this right. "Listen, I don't know what to say," Marcus began, his voice strained. "I never knew about you. I never knew about any times of this. I don't even know where to begin." Another pause. Longer this time, before Jones spoke again. "You don't need to say anything, Marcus. You've already made your choices. I've watched it all from the sidelines. You built your empire and left me out of it. What's left to say?" The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had never been prepared for this, never imagined that his son's voice so calm, so measured, would strike him so hard. "I wasn't there," Marcus whispered, the guilt tearing through him like a storm. "I should have been, and I wasn't. You deserved more. I'm sorry." There was a long silence on the other end before Jones finally spoke, his voice soft, almost unreadable. "I don't need your apology, Marcus. I respect what you built, even if you weren't there to build it with me. But that's the thing, you never built it with me. You built it without me." Marcus swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his own regrets. This wasn't about fixing the company anymore. This was about fixing the relationship he had broken, about giving his son the chance to decide if he even wanted him in his life. "Then let me make it right," Marcus said, his voice stronger now. "Jones, I want you to be part of this. Not just as someone who fixed HelixCore. I want you to help lead TileTech. I want you as a co-leader in this company. The future is yours." There was a long pause, the silence stretching across the line. Marcus's heart raced as he waited for Jones to respond. Finally, Jones spoke, his voice low but steady. "I never wanted your empire, Marcus, but I'll help you. I'll help you rebuild it on my own terms, because if anything, I've learned from watching you. Asterisk. This time's what you built. What I fixed has to be done right, and I'm willing to give it a shot." Marcus felt a surge of emotion, relief and guilt mingling in the pit of his stomach. This wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was a start. Jones was willing to give him a chance, and in that moment, Marcus knew that he was finally standing on the edge of something new. "Thank you," Marcus said, the words more meaningful than they'd ever been before. "Thank you." As the call ended, Marcus sat back in his chair, the weight of the world shifting ever so slightly off his shoulders. It wasn't over. The work had just begun, but for the first time in years, he felt like he might finally be on the path to something that mattered more than success, something that had eluded him for far too long, a chance to finally be the father he should have been. And maybe, just maybe, the redemption he sought wasn't in the boardrooms or the deals he had won. Maybe it was in the eyes of the son who had, against all odds, chosen to help him fix the one thing he could never repair on his own. The day Marcus stood at the edge of the conference room, watching Jones take the seat at the head of the table, he felt a bittersweet sense of finality. It was a shift in power he never anticipated. The empire he had built with his blood, sweat, and tears, his life's work was no longer his to command. He had spent so many years consumed by ambition, chasing success with a relentless drive that had cost him nearly everything. Now, he was watching the one person he had abandoned rise up to take his place. The moment was heavy. As he passed the mantle to Jones, Marcus felt like a ghost in his own company. standing in the background while his son prepared to reshape everything. Jones's demeanor had changed over the past few weeks. What had once been uncertainty and quiet hesitation was now replaced with calm confidence and sharp clarity. Where Marcus had once led with force and a sharp focus on results, Jones brought a more thoughtful, measured approach, an approach that made Marcus realize, with growing awe, that his son was exactly what TileTek needed. "You're ready for this," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. It was the first time he had acknowledged it fully. For years, he had seen Jones as a distant shadow, a figure in his past. But now, in this moment, he saw something else, a leader, not just in mind, but in spirit. Jones nodded, his gaze steady as he took in the room full of executives, all looking to him now. "We're going to do things differently," he said, his voice calm but powerful. "We'll focus on innovation, sustainability, and most of all, the people behind our technology. It's time to reshape not just the company, but how we operate within the world." For Marcus, it was both a relief and a sorrow. He had spent years building this company to dominate, but now he realized that true leadership wasn't about control or brute force. It was about vision, about creating a space for those with the right ideas, the right values, to rise. Jones was that future. As Marcus stepped back, the familiar hum of the office, once his battleground, his kingdom, felt different. For the first time, he wasn't holding the reins, and it was terrifying. But in that terror, there was also a quiet peace. This was the right thing. This was the only way forward. The company was changing, evolving under Jones's leadership. The focus shifted from short-term profit to long-term sustainability. TileTek's innovative projects, once hidden beneath the weight of corporate greed, were now brought to the forefront. And Marcus, now standing in the wings, watched with a kind of pride he'd never allowed himself to feel before. He had watched his son grow into someone who could lead, who could take this company into a future that Marcus had never been able to see. As he sat in the corner of his office, observing the shift, Marcus allowed himself a final reflection. For all the victories he had won, the deals, the accolades, none of it had been enough to fill the emptiness. He had chased success like a man chasing shadows, but in the end, it had been his son who had shown him the true cost of his ambition. Now, as Jones made the decisions, Marcus had never been able to make decisions that would define the future of TileTek. Marcus realized that his legacy was no longer in his hands. It was in the hands of the son he had once abandoned. And for the first time in a long time, he understood this was how it was always supposed to be. The future was rewritten, and it belonged to Jones. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. And do well to click on the subscribe button and turn on notifications for the next story.